Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is What If Naruto Saved Uzumaki Clan and Council Bashing Part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Naruto couldn't believe what had just happened. Not even an hour ago, he had been betrayed by one of his teachers. Mizuki Tem had tricked him into stealing the village's forbidden scroll, and then tried to kill him and Iruka-sensei. He didn't even want to think about the other thing Mizuki had told him about. But now he knew why everyone in the village hated him. He had a demon, the Kyubi no Kitsune, sealed inside of him. He was relieved that Iruka had told him that he wasn't a demon himself. His world had come crashing down when Mizuki first told him. But Iruka said he believed in Naruto, and Naruto wasn't going to betray the trust Iruka-sensei had in him. I'm going to show those villagers that I'm not the Kyubi. I'll make them acknowledge me Ibeo. Naruto, how are you feeling? The aging Hokage asked the boy. They had been sitting in the office for half an hour, and the boy hadn't spoken even once. I heard from the hospital a few moments ago. You don't need to worry, Naruto. Iruka is going to be fine. He is. Thanked Kami. I was really worried. Naruto let out a breath that he hadn't even realized he'd been holding in. You'll be able to visit him tomorrow morning, Naruto, but for now we really need to talk about what you've been through. Naruto had expected this. He really didn't want to relive what had happened, but he knew he couldn't just imagine it hadn't happened. Just start at the beginning, Naruto. Explain everything that you remember. Naruto let out a sigh before starting. Okay, GG, I was sitting out in front of the academy after I failed my exam again, and watching the other kids show off their Hitai to their families, when Mizuki-sensei came up to me and told me that there was a secret test that would let me pass the exam. Naruto hated himself looking back. He should have known that there wasn't any stupid test, but he just sighed and continued. Anyways, Mizuki Tem. Sensei told me that all I had to do to pass was sneak into your office, grab that stupid scroll, and meet up with him in the forest. Now it was the Hokage's turn to sigh. He figured this was how it started. He was disgusted that one of the teachers would abuse the trust of one of his students for something like that. Okay, Naruto, what happened next? Well, Naruto started chuckling. You should remember the next part, GG. I got in here, and knocked you out with my Oroku no Jutsu. Naruto couldn't help but grin at that. He couldn't believe that the Hokage, the most powerful ninja in the village, had been taken out with his own original anti-pervert technique. As his chuckling stopped, he decided to continue. But anyways, the next thing I did was I grabbed that scroll, and took off. I found my way to where Mizuki Tem said to meet him. But cause he wasn't there yet, I decided to take a look inside the scroll, and saw it was full of jutsu. Naruto, before you continue, I want to tell you that you are hereby forbidden from speaking about how you got the scroll, and I'm also going to have you write everything you know about that technique into the forbidden scroll. You just want to know how to do it yourself, don't you, GG? Naruto accused jokingly, while narrowing his eyes at the old man. No, Naruto, that technique is obviously dangerous, as it was able to defeat me so easily. The fact is that there are a great many talented shinobi in this village that would fall prey to that technique, and as such, I am labeling it a forbidden technique. At this, Naruto cracked a small smirk. I wonder just how many perverts I could use this on to beat. Okay, GG, you win. I'll write it down in the scroll, but I'm not going to never use it again. What happens if I'm fighting some super pervert or something, and that's my best chance for beating him? Fine, Naruto, I won't forbid you from using it, but under no circumstances are you to go around teaching it to people. Now please continue with the story. This caused Naruto to become downcast again as he began speaking again. Okay, well, I opened the scroll, and the first thing I saw was another stupid clone technique. And because I always sucked at those, I decided to look a bit more, but they all seemed so complicated. I just went back to it, and started trying to learn it. The Hokage's jaw dropped at this. wondering just how far Naruto had managed to get on that jutsu. After all, it was a Jonin level technique. After a little while, Iruka-sensei showed up and started yelling at me for stealing the scroll, and when I told him Mizuki Tem told me about it, he started freaking out. Then all of a sudden Mizuki Tem showed up and started attacking us. Naruto took a deep breath, and seeing that the Hokage was about to interrupt him, he decided to finish the story, because he figured that if he stopped talking, he wouldn't be able to finish telling him the story. So then, Iruka-sensei told me to run and get away from the fight, which I did, but pretty soon Mizuki Tem caught up with me again, and he managed to get Iruka-sensei with a couple kunai. At this point some tears started to flow from Naruto's eyes, remembering his sensei getting all those wounds protecting him. Then Mizuki Tem told me about the QB inside of me and called me ADD demon, and then he said that even Iruka-sensei hated me. By this point Naruto was barely holding himself together, as he was gritting his teeth trying to hold back as many tears as he could as he was gripping tightly at his pants. In the end, next thing I knew, he was throwing one of his giant shuriken at me, and I couldn't even move, but then, Iruka-sensei was there, and he got hit in the back with it. He told me that I wasn't a demon, and that the villagers were wrong about me. He told me that I was being a hero, keeping them safe every day just by keeping the QB inside me. Naruto could no longer hold back the tears, as they began flowing steadily down his face, dripping onto the floor in front of him. Then Mizuki Tem was insulting Iruka-sensei, and I couldn't take it anymore, so I used the new technique I learned and created like 1,000 clones, and kicked the Tems. By this point Hiruzen Sarutobi couldn't hold back his shock. An academy student, using the Kage Bunshin, an academy student creating 1,000 clones, he couldn't hold himself back anymore. You learnt the Kage Bunshin no jutsu in one night. And then you made 1,000 clones. That's impossible, Naruto. Not even the Yondaime learned it that quickly. How did you manage that so easily, and how are you not dead from chakra exhaustion? The Sarutobi was skeptical at the thought of it. A genin, mastering a Jonin level technique in under an hour, it was unheard of. Naruto was surprised by the Sandame's reaction. After all, it wasn't that difficult to learn, but upon hearing that he had mastered a Jonin level technique, he was pulled out of his depressed slump. He wasn't bouncing around, but he'd probably do that later. Ha! Take that, everyone. The class, Dobi, mastered a forbidden Jonin level technique, and didn't even get in trouble for it. Actually, GG, I was kinda shocked how easy it was. I mean, I've always sucked at the Academy Bunshin, and no matter how much chakra I pumped into them, they'd always turn out sickly, but with these, I barely needed to use any chakra and they turned out awesome. By now Sarutobi's mind was searching for some way to explain this occurrence. The only thing that would make sense is if the boy has an impossibly high chakra reserve. Baka. Okami, how did I not realize before? As an Uzumaki, he was bound to have abnormally high chakra reserves, and on top of that he does have a demon that is essentially a giant mass of chakra sealed inside of him. Wait, if he's got that much chakra, then there's something else I need to test. Okay, Naruto, I think I know why you've been having so much trouble with the Academy Jutsus, but before I explain, I would like you to perform the 3 standard Academy Jutsu. Naruto was a bit confused, but he slowly made his way to his feet with the Hokage, who walked around his desk to stand in front of Naruto. Alright, Naruto, I want you to try use the Henge no Jutsu to look like the scroll. Can you do that, Naruto? Naruto was surprised he was being asked to do something so simple, so he quickly went through hand signs. Henge no Jutsu. Sarutobi was shocked when the puff of smoke cleared, and he was staring down at an exact duplicate of the village's forbidden scroll. He reached down, and slowly picked up the scroll, examining it, with a shocked expression on his face. He placed the scroll back on the ground and asked Naruto to return to normal, and with a puff of smoke Naruto was back. It seems like my suspicions may be correct. Okay, Naruto, I would now like you to use the Kawarimi no Jutsu to replace yourself with me. Hiruzen made sure he spoke calmly, so as not to suggest something may be unusual about his request. Naruto, once again surprised by the odd request, went through the necessary hand signs, Kawarimi no Jutsu. He was once again engulfed in a small puff of smoke, and when the Hokage looked up, he saw Naruto leaning against his desk smiling slightly. Well, that answers that. He was able to switch places with me, the only people able to do that should be the other cages. Very good, Naruto. Now please, the Bunshin. At this point Naruto began to feel worried. No, why does GG need to see the Bunshin? I've never been able to do that one. Naruto, in a very downcast manner, went through the hand seals, Bunshin no Jutsu. To Naruto's dismay, a pair of sickly-looking clones appeared at his feet. Looking thoroughly dejected, he dispelled the clones, and turned to look up at the aging Hokage, surprised to see him with a large smile on his face. Now Naruto, if you would please, show me the cage Bunshin, just show me how many you can make in this room. He was positive that his assumptions were right, he just couldn't resist the opportunity. Seeing this would give him to praise his surrogate grandson. He knew how much the boy suffered, and wished he could have done more, but he knew the praise would help the boy out. Cage Bunshin no Jutsu. All of a sudden the room was filled with a plume of smoke, and when the smoke cleared, the Hokage couldn't hold the shocked expression off of his face. Surrounding him, literally wall to wall, were Naruto's. He even saw some on top of his shelves, and saw them all squirming for room. By this point in time, the Hokage was beaming. He was immensely proud of Naruto. Naruto, dispel them and have a seat again. I'd like to talk to you about your techniques. Naruto was a bit worried about this, but seeing his surrogate grandfather's smile told him that at least he wasn't in trouble, so he dispelled the clones, feeling a small headache coming on, and settled down in the chair in front of the desk. Well, Naruto, today has proved to be a very interesting day, hasn't it? First you steal a forbidden scroll, then you stop a traitor, and now I find you've mastered 3 Jonin-level techniques before graduating the academy. If it wasn't for the fact that the graduation exams were over, I'd probably have to make you Rookie of the Year. Sadly, it's too late for that. GG, what do you mean 3 Jonin techniques? 2 of them were just the academy ones. To say Naruto was slightly confused was an understatement, but thankfully, he saw the Hokage was still smiling, and he had a feeling that he'd find out what the Hokage meant. Naruto, those 2 are academy techniques, but you've been using them at a Jonin level. If you paid more attention in class you'd know that the henge is supposed to be a genjutsu, and just make you appear as something else. What you've been doing is actually a full transformation technique, which makes it Jonin level, and as for your Kawarimi, normally somebody your age shouldn't be able to even switch themselves with another person. The fact that you could switch places with me means your chakra reserves surpass even mine, and I'm the Hokage. But GG, if I've got so much chakra, how come I can't even do the Bunshin? That's simple, Naruto, you just have too much chakra for it. Your clones always turn out sickly, because they are overcharged and the amount of chakra you put into them quite literally kills them. The Hokage couldn't help but smirk at the young blonde's expression. The boy was opening and closing his mouth trying to figure out something to say, but the words were obviously eluding him. Now Naruto, I need to tell you something about the Cage Bunshin that should help you with your training over the next 3 months before we have the Genin team announcements. Now that Naruto had gotten his mouth to stop opening and closing, he looked back at his surrogate grandfather. I wonder what my super cool jutsu can do. I've gotta get really strong before I get on my team. I hope it'll help. Naruto thought desperately. Naruto, there are 2 reasons the Cage Bunshin is a forbidden technique. The first being that it requires a lot of chakra to use efficiently. In fact, it requires so much that most shinobi under the rank of Jonin can't even create 2 without passing out from chakra exhaustion. The second is because of the mental and physical stress it causes on the user. Do you mean that's why my head hurts a bit after I use it? GG, 'cause I was wondering about that. Yes, Naruto, the Cage Bunshin causes mental stress, because everything your clones experience gets transferred to you. Huh. Sighing slightly at the boy's confusion, he spoke again. Naruto, what I mean is that when your clones learn something you learn it too, And before you interrupt me asking what I mean, let me just give you a demonstration. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. With that, an exact duplicate appeared next to the Hokage, and the clone instructed Naruto to create a clone as well. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Okay, Naruto. Now our clones are going to step out of the room for a moment and then dispel. I think that'll help you understand what I mean. The Sandaime was smirking at the look of confusion on Naruto's face as he watched the clones leave the room, and a second later, he felt his head tingle. GG, when are we getting that ramen? Wait, how do I know you said you'd buy my ramen? The aging Hokage just stood there waiting for Naruto to figure it out, and after a few minutes, he saw Naruto's face light up. Oh, I get it, so if my clones learn something I can learn it too. Aw man, this is gonna be so awesome. I'm going to get so strong with this stuff. Just you wait, old man, I'll get that hat from you sooner than you think. Ttebao. Naruto had a giant grin plastered across his face at the thought of sitting behind the Hokage desk in the robes and hat, and got more and more excited at the idea of being the one handing out orders and having everyone respect him. Meanwhile, the Hokage was chuckling. Well, Naruto, I'm sure you will get strong, but before you go running off, I've still got more to tell you about the technique. This got Naruto's attention, and he dropped right back into the chair he hadn't even realized he had sat up from. Naruto, the main reason this technique is so dangerous is because each of your clones is technically you. So whatever they experience, you experience, but the danger comes from the fact that because they are all you. Whenever they dispel, you also get all the exhaustion they've experienced, so it's a very physically draining technique. So as good as it is for training, you have to make sure you give yourself time to heal after using it. And also, Naruto, physical training will exhaust your clones, but if you have your clones using weights and everything, it'll tire them out, but you won't get the effects of the weights, so any body conditioning you still have to do yourself. Naruto was a bit downcast at this, knowing that he'd have to be the one running around with weights, but he quickly decided that it didn't matter much, cause he'd just have his clones working on his taijutsu katas, and his ninjutsu, so when he got rid of the clones he'd be way better at everything. Okay, but GG, where can I go to learn more stuff? I mean, most of the academy teachers hated me, and Iruka is in the hospital, so where can I go to learn more stuff? The Hokage sat there for a few minutes, thinking over Naruto's question. He continually cursed the elders of the council, forbidding him from giving Naruto his inheritance from the Uzumaki clan. He would have to find some way around that, but the only way that would happen is if Naruto asked him for them first, and with the boy knowing nothing of his clan, that wasn't going to happen, when suddenly an idea popped into his head. Well, Naruto, you should head to the shinobi library. They have hundreds of jutsu, though as a genin you'll only be eligible for E and D rank ninjutsu scrolls, but they have scrolls on all sorts of things from taijutsu, to kenjutsu, genjutsu, and even some minor fuinjutsu, and now that you have your Hitai 8, it is impossible for them to bar you in trance. There are even the shinobi record inside that will tell you about all the ninja who ever served Konoha. The Sandaime couldn't help but smirk in his mind at this. He knew that Naruto would jump at this opportunity. Even if the boy didn't like reading, the thoughts of all those techniques would override his dislike for studying, and with the mention of the shinobi records, the boy would without a doubt search through the records for some sort of family, especially since he told the boy years ago that his parents had been shinobi who died in service of the village. Naruto was in deep thought by now. Maybe the old man is messing with me. I mean, going to the library to get stronger. Sounds crazy. Maybe his age is getting to him. I guess I could send some clones to look as there's any cool stuff there, and maybe the records could tell me something about my parents. I mean, GG did say they were shinobi. Okay, I'll go look at the library for some cool techniques. Say, old man, what do you think I should look for in the library? Well, off the top of my head, I'd say you need to get a book on chakra control, and maybe look into some shinobi tactics. And if you're serious about taking my hat someday, you should look into some history books as well as some of the shinobi laws, because you need to know all that to be Hokage. But GG, that's all so boring. Well then why don't you make your clones do the reading, while you go train? It's all information you should know, so if it's too tedious to do yourself then just send your clones to do it. Naruto thought about it for a minute, and decided that if he had to know it, he might as well put the clones to use, and make them study the boring stuff, and he could go do some cool training. Wait a minute, if I can just do that, then why don't any other shinobi use clones to do all that stupid boring stuff? Hey GG, if I can use my clones for that, then why don't you just use them to do all that paperwork? That's what I'll do when I'm Hokage. I don't want to be sitting around all day when I can be off showing everyone how badass I am. TTEBAO. Quote comma quote. Quote comma quote. Quote comma quote. The Hokage couldn't believe what he'd just heard. Was this your secret, Minato? How could I have been so blind not to see it? I don't care what his grades say, Minato. Kushina, your boy is a genius. After a few minutes of awkward silence, he got his face under control, and looked up at Naruto in awe. The U-Blonde had just given him the secret to defeat the one great enemy of all the Kages, the secret method of challenging the Kage's bane that only Konoha's Yondaime had ever been able to defeat, paperwork. Naruto, you don't know what you've just done for me. Naruto was confused. The old man was tearing up, with an impossibly happy smile on his face. Naruto, for the service you have just done me, you deserve a gift. Before you get your team assignments, I'm going to take you out equipment shopping, to get you some new shinobi tools and clothes, but for now, get some sleep and tomorrow morning I'll take you to see Iruka. We can grab some ramen, and I'll buy you a set of chakra weights to help out with your training. Naruto was enjoying one of the best nights of sleep he had had in what felt like forever. He was having dreams of how strong he'd become. He saw himself mastering every jutsu, and having the old man tell him that he was the strongest, and as such he should be the one wearing the hat. He even dreamt of Sakura-chan, and how she'd finally realize how awesome he was once he beat that Tem Sasuke. However, his happy dreams weren't going to last, seeing as the Hokage's assistant had just walked into the office where Naruto had spent the night. What are you doing in here? Naruto shot off the couch, clutching his ears, and found himself falling face first into the floor. After slowly sitting up, he looked to find the source of the noise, and saw the old man's secretary looking down at him. Oh, hey Chizuru-san, sorry Gigi said I could sleep here last night, hehe. Naruto was scratching the back of his head as he explained a little of his talk with the secretary. Despite her yelling, he knew that the old man's secretary didn't hate him. Sure, he knew she got annoyed with him sometimes, but she at least saw him as a person. Well then Uzumaki-san, I'd suggest that because you're here, you could help me carry in the first of the day's paperwork. Sure thing Chizuru-san, Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Okay guys, you heard Chizuru-san, get that paperwork in here for GG. You got it boss. The Hokage's secretary didn't know how to react to what she had just seen. She decided to shrug off the young shinobi's antics, and was back to herself helping the all 10 Narutos organize the paperwork for the Hokage. I know Sandaime-sama is going to get upset when he sees all this paperwork. Naruto and Chizuru chatted for a couple minutes as the clones brought in the last of the paperwork. Well, Naruto chatted about all the cool things he was hoping to learn, while Chizuru listened. Soon it was around 9 in the morning, and the aging Hokage strolled into the room. He saw Naruto and his longtime secretary Chizuru chatting, and then his eyes fell upon the recently placed mountain of paperwork sitting on his desk. Well, it seems that we meet again, my dreaded mortal enemy. Yesterday I would have nearly cried seeing you piled so high, but I now know your weakness. You shall never darken my dreams again, ha ha ha. Good morning Chizuru-san, Naruto. Morning GG. Chizuru was confused. She had seen the Hokage's eyes when he looked at his paperwork, and couldn't believe what she had seen. What's going on? He doesn't even look fazed by the paperwork, and I know for a fact it's more than double what was there yesterday. However, she realized that she hadn't even responded to the Hokage's greeting yet and quickly composed herself. Good morning Hokage-sama, is there anything you need this morning? or would you prefer I just let you get started? The Hokages couldn't help but grin wider when he realized what caused his secretary's confusion, and decided to play it up a bit. Well, I wouldn't mind some tea to start off the day, as well as a glass of milk for Naruto. We have some things planned for today, and we'd like to be off as soon as possible. Now his secretary's face was in shock. The Hokage was planning on leaving the office with all the paperwork piled on his desk. She nodded dumbly and decided she needed to get her thoughts straight. Maybe the Hokage was just feeling a bit under the weather today. After all, what else could explain his planning to leave the office right after he arrived? Naruto watched the secretary leave, and didn't really understand her expression, so as soon as she had left the office and closed the door, he turned to the Hokage. "GG, what was with Chizuru? I mean, she's usually really strict, but she looked kinda weird when she just left." "Well, Naruto, Chizuru has been my secretary for a long time, almost 6 years now actually, and for the first time the paperwork didn't even bother me, so she's probably just shocked by this, but don't let that trouble you, Naruto." The Hokage was chuckling by now. "Anyhow, after Chizuru-san gets back with some tea and milk, we'll head out and I'll treat you to breakfast before picking you up some chakra weights and showing you the shinobi library." This brought Naruto's attention back around, and though he was excited for getting the chakra weights, he still wasn't looking forward to the library. "Sure, I mean, I'm not personally going to be reading all those stupid history books and law stuff, but I'm still gonna have to remember all of it. Maybe I'll do what Gigi suggested, and get a book on chakra control or something like that, and have a bunch of clones working on that. At least that way I'll get a bit stronger with them." Naruto left his interior monologue to see the Hokage standing at the window, smiling while looking out over the city. "What are you looking at, Gigi?" Sarutobi was just enjoying the peaceful morning, and was musing over what he should do with all the time he was going to have to himself again now that he wouldn't have to spend every minute of every day behind those piles of paperwork, and turned away from the window at Naruto's question. "I have been debating what I should do with my time now that thanks to your idea I don't have to be behind that desk all day. I was thinking about spending more time visiting the academy, and maybe just spending more time walking around the village, and talking with the civilians, but I still feel like if I don't have a lot to do, I'll just end up back here, doing paperwork." "Well, Gigi, why don't you train more then? I mean, I know you're supposed to be the strongest and everything 'cause you're Hokage, but that doesn't mean you can't get stronger, does it?" The Hokage was slightly shocked at the idea, once again wondering how he hadn't thought of it. Sure, he was getting close to 70, but back in his youth he had been dubbed Kami no Shinobi. He had been considered the strongest Hokage, and as much as he hated to admit it, he had grown weaker over the years. Just remembering the last time he had summoned Enma, they had been talking about how long it had been since they had a fight, or even just a spar. "Well, it couldn't hurt to get back in a state where I can fight again. I won't be able to get back to my prime, but what I lack in vitality, I could make up for in experience. There's no downside I can see, and I have always regretted letting my condition slide, and now that I don't have to worry about the paperwork, there isn't anything that will be in my way." "Thank you for that, Naruto. I think I'll follow your suggestion. After all, it wouldn't be good for the village if their Hokage was seen as getting weak, would it?" Naruto didn't respond. He just smiled up at his surrogate grandfather, glad that he could be of help again, so they just both turned to the window again, and waited in silence for a few minutes. Being quiet wasn't Naruto's favorite way of spending time, but he decided to use this time to figure out how he wanted to use his clones for the next little while, at least while they were in the library, so the silence continued for several minutes until it was broken by a knock on the office door. "Come in, Chizuru." Naruto and the Hokage turned around and watched as Chizuru walked in, bowed briefly and then turned to make her way out. As she got to the door, however, the Hokage spoke again. "Thank you, Chizuru. Could you make sure my schedule is clear till the afternoon? I'll be back in briefly then to make sure everything is alright." "Of course, Hokage-sama, if that's what you would like." Chizuru was almost sure of it. The Hokage must be feeling ill if he was going to go through with his plan of leaving all the paperwork behind, but sighing slightly she figured that he would make up for it the next day, even if he had to come in early. She barely noticed Naruto's thanks, and merely waved a hand at him, to show it wasn't a worry. Then she made her way to her desk outside the office and sat down, and got to her own paperwork. Back inside the office, the elder man and the young boy were enjoying their drinks and discussing where to go for breakfast, because it was rare for them to spend much time together. Naruto, of course, being Naruto, suggested Ichiraku ramen, which the Hokage shot down. Naruto, I know how much you love ramen, but you need to eat more healthy foods as well. You won't get all the nutrition you need if you only eat ramen. But GG, ramen is the food of the gods. How can you say I'm not getting everything I need? I'm great, and I've never gotten sick from eating ramen. Naruto, you don't have to stop eating ramen, but if you want to be a strong shinobi you need to eat healthier, and if being healthy isn't enough, I can promise you adding some variety to what you eat, and eating healthier won't hurt your growth. If you don't have variety in what you eat, you're not getting all the nutritional value you should, and that makes it take longer for you to grow. At this, Naruto's objections were cut off. His height was a sore spot for him. He really didn't like how he was one of the shortest people in his class, and he quickly, if extremely dejectedly, decided that if he had to give up ramen a couple days a week to help him get taller, then he would. Okay, GG, you win, no ramen, but if we're not going to Ichiraku's, where are we gonna go? Not a lot of places let me in, cause of the KQB. Sarutobi sighed at this. He hated how the villagers would get around his law regarding Naruto containing the QB, and how he would be kicked out of a lot of the shops in Konoha. Well, don't worry about that, Naruto. You're with me today, and nowhere in the village would they dare turn you away when you're with me, so that's not an issue. And when we go get your weights, I'll take you to a store that an old friend of mine owns. I know that they'll be more than happy for your business. Really, GG? That'll be awesome. Okay, let's go then. 1 minute, Naruto. I still need to do my paperwork. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. With a puff of smoke, 4 clones of the Hokage went behind the desk and started dividing up the paperwork. Now remember, once I'm gone, put up a privacy barrier, so this stays a secret. We can't have Naruto's idea leaked out to everyone, can we? Also make sure you read every single report. We can do that now. If you need to, you can each create another clone, but make sure that by the time I get back that we're at least halfway through all these piles. After addressing the clones, the Hokage led Naruto out of the office, and closed the door behind them. The Hokage couldn't help but smirk again as he said his farewells to his secretary again, and made his way out of the tower. Out in the streets of Konoha, the Hokage and Naruto were making their way to a small family-owned restaurant that the Hokage had frequented often during the time where the Yondaime had reigned. He hadn't been there in a little over a year now, seeing as it was rare for him to have any spare time in the mornings, but he had told Naruto that it was a very nice restaurant focusing on cuisine from all across the elemental nations, even having some dishes that originated outside of the elemental nations. Needless to say, Naruto was excited at the prospect of all the new food he could try, and he figured that if the people who owned the restaurant were friends with his surrogate grandfather, that they might let him come back on his own as well. He'd have to remember to ask the old man if he could do anything about it. As they were walking, the Hokage could see the stares the villagers were directing at Naruto. He couldn't understand how the village could look at Naruto this way. The Yondaime Hokage was regarded as a hero. He was one of the most talented shinobi to ever be born. He couldn't understand how the village could have placed so much faith in his skills during his life, and how they could have so little faith in the seal he designed for Naruto. Minato, you must be rolling over in your grave watching how the villagers are going against your last wish. If you or Kushina were still here, this never would have happened. I'm sorry I've failed you both so completely when it comes to your son. The Hokage glanced towards Naruto, and he saw the look in Naruto's eyes. He knew Naruto had noticed the stares he received, and he couldn't deny that he was worried how the boy would react now that he knew the reason behind the stares. Naruto was deep in thought. He finally knew why the villagers all hated him, and it only strengthened his resolve to get their acknowledgement. Just you wait, I'm going to be the most kick-ass ninja you've ever seen, then you will all have to acknowledge me Ibeo. Naruto noticed that the Hokage was watching him with a worried expression, and turned to the old man and smiled. Don't worry GG, I can ignore them, I've been doing it as long as I can remember, let's just get some food, I'm starving. The old man could tell that the boy was hiding his true emotions, but he sighed knowing that it was the blonde's way of coping. He understood that it was also the reason the boy would play all the pranks he did. The boy just wanted some attention, and even if it wasn't good attention, any attention was better than the hate-filled glares he usually received. Making one more turn, the Hokage led Naruto through the entryway of a nice-looking restaurant called Yaokei Shokudo. Naruto was slightly apprehensive walking in, but seeing the surprised and happy looks the old man was getting, he figured he'd be fine. He still noticed some of the diners giving him looks, but paid them no mind. Hokage-sama, good morning, it's great to see you, you visited us in ages. Naruto looked up, and saw a man who looked a bit older than Iruka walk up to the Hokage and bow to him. Ah, hello Kenji-san, is your father in this morning? I'd like to talk to him if he had some free time. Naruto just watched the two adults talk, and noticed that though the younger of the two men gave him a look, it wasn't filled with hate, more so just curiosity, so he decided he'd give the man the benefit of the doubt for now. Of course he's here Hokage-sama, I'll go grab him for you, but for now, you and your guest can take a seat, we have a few tables open, so feel free to seat yourself and I'll be right back with my old man. And with a smirk the man was off, and the Hokage was leading Naruto to a table near the front window. Hey GG, who was that? I thought you said an old friend of yours owned this place, that guy was maybe a couple years older than Iruka-sensei. Ah, yes you are right Naruto, that was Yaokei Kenji, his father Rojin owns this restaurant, and don't worry, Rojin-san is almost as old as I am. At this time Naruto noticed the man named Kenji come back out from the back of the restaurant with an old man, who Naruto could only assume was Rojin. Hiruzen, how've you been doing? Naruto was shocked at this. He'd heard a few people call the Hokage by his last name before, but they always used honorifics at least. This guy must be a really old friend to just call the Hokage by his first name. Rojin, it is good to see you, it has been a while. The Hokage was smiling warmly at the other old man. By the way Rojin, Kenji, this is Uzumaki Naruto, I was taking him out for breakfast, and found he'd never been here before, so I took the liberty to bring him along, I've spoken very highly of your food. At this the two men looked at Naruto, and surprising Naruto they smiled at him. Hello Uzumaki-san, I'm Kenji, and this is my father's restaurant. It is nice to meet you Uzumaki-san, any friend of Hiruzen's is a friend of mine, and is always welcome in my restaurant. Naruto's shock at these greetings were clearly plastered on his face. What? Naruto took a minute to figure out that he was supposed to respond and somewhat shakily turned to the two men. Thanks, it's nice to meet you as well. Still in a state of something near shock, Naruto wasn't paying attention to what the three adults were talking about, until once again Kenji turned back to him. So Uzumaki-san, have you decided what you'd like to have? At this Naruto was slightly shocked, he hadn't even realized he'd opened the menu, he certainly hadn't been reading it. I think Naruto will have the extra large breakfast special. At this Naruto looked up at the Hokage, and slowly nodded. Yeah, sure, I'll have what GG suggested, could I also get some milk too? Of course Uzumaki-san, I'll be back with your drink in a minute, your meal will take a little longer, so just ask me if you need anything. Naruto just nodded dumbly again, and started fiddling with his hands. He wasn't really paying any attention to the conversation the two old men were having. He picked up bits, but it seemed like they were just talking about when they were both young, something he had noticed that all older people tended to do. Well, it was nice to meet you again Uzumaki-san, but I should really get back into the kitchen, I just want you to know that you're always welcome in here. Enjoy your meal, Uzumaki-san, Hiruzen. Naruto waited another minute or so after the man left before turning back to his surrogate grandfather. Okay, Gigi, what's with those two? Why are they being all nice to me? The Hokage sighed at this, not really blaming the boy for his distrust. Naruto, Rojin is a very old friend of mine, and I have known his son Kenji since the day he was born. You have nothing to worry about from them. I'm positive that they'll accept you just as much as Tuki and Ayame do. So I'd recommend just enjoying your meal, and if you enjoy it, I'd recommend you come back and get to know them some more. Naruto and the Hokage spent the rest of their time at the restaurant talking about Naruto's training. The Hokage even came up with an idea to help convince Naruto to take the readings he suggested seriously. Because Naruto had been told not to eat ramen all the time, the old man had decided that at the end of each week he would buy Naruto a bowl of ramen from Ichiraku for every book he read. Naruto wasn't entirely sure how to feel about the agreement. He was unhappy he'd only get ramen once a week, but on the other hand, he figured with his clones he'd be able to read easily 20 books a week, though he wasn't happy that the Hokage said he would be tested on his knowledge of the books by Iruka-sensei. But seeing as Naruto had never been one to go back on an agreement, he decided he'd just have to make the most out of it, and he figured it wouldn't be a bad thing to get smarter. After the two finished their meals, which the Hokage insisted on paying for as long as Naruto promised to work hard on his training, they left to visit Iruka in the hospital. All in all, Naruto had been enjoying the day so far. It was nearly noon, they were just getting to the hospital. The Hokage and Naruto made their way to Iruka's room, and after being invited in after knocking, the two made their way inside. Hokage-sama, Naruto, what are you two doing here? Good day, Iruka-san, how are you feeling? Yeah, you okay, Iruka-sensei? I'm fine, Naruto. Hokage-sama, thank you both for your concern. So how are you doing, Naruto? Are you feeling okay after what you went through last night? Naruto felt his eyes water at that. Iruka was one of the few people who had acknowledged him, and had gotten pretty badly injured during Mizuki's attempt to steal the scroll, and he was asking how he was feeling. I'm sorry, Iruka-sensei, if I was a better ninja neither of us would have gotten hurt. Naruto held back his watering eyes, and just told Iruka that he was fine. Though Iruka could tell that Naruto was still having trouble dealing with everything he had learned, he decided not to pressure the young blonde into speaking about it until he was comfortable with it. So Iruka decided to lie back, and let Naruto talk. He was surprised when Naruto told him about the jutsus he'd been using at the academy, and apologized to the boy for not noticing the cause of his issues himself, and continued cursing himself for the next little while, as Naruto went into talking about the training he was going to do for the next few months. He was shocked to hear that Naruto was going to study the shinobi history and laws, but he readily agreed to test Naruto at the end of each week on his knowledge. He was even more shocked to hear that Naruto was only going to eat ramen once a week. The idea of Naruto eating food other than ramen was hard to imagine, but he was mentally praising the Hokage for his ingenious method of convincing Naruto not to cheat on his healthier diet by offering to buy him the ramen himself. He was also very pleased to hear that Naruto was planning on working on chakra control, because after finding out how much chakra the blonde had, he figured it would take him a lot of work to get his control up. Sadly for the visiting group, due to the fact that Iruka's injuries weren't fully recovered, a nurse broke up the group's visit after an hour or so, and though she apologized profusely to the Hokage for having to ask them to leave, she still did insist. As the two were about to leave, Naruto turned around in the doorway and Iruka could see the boy was holding back tears for some reason. I'm sorry, Iruka-sensei, I promise I'll get stronger, so you don't get hurt protecting me again. I'll get strong enough to make you proud of me. Iruka was stunned by this. He knew that Naruto would be upset over everything he had found out, but this was more than Iruka would stand for. Naruto, it's not your fault I got hurt. I'm a shinobi, it's in the job description, so don't worry about it, and I look forward to you getting stronger, but you should know I'm already very proud of you for how far you've come. This being more than Naruto wanted to deal with at the moment, prompted him to quickly turn around and exit the room following after the Hokage. It was now in the early afternoon and Naruto was following as the Hokage led towards the shinobi library. After his discussion with Iruka, he was feeling oddly reflective. Hey Gigi, do you think I can become a great shinobi someday? What do you mean, Naruto? Well, if I was really as awesome of a ninja as I say I am, Iruka-sensei wouldn't have gotten hurt, so I am going to have to get stronger so that I'll be able to protect everybody important to me. So do you think I could ever become a great shinobi like the Yondaime? At this the Hokage could only think of how proud the young blonde's parents would be of their son. It seems like Naruto is finally taking his ninja career seriously. Minato, Kushina, you would be so proud of how much your son has grown. Naruto, I believe that one day you could be one of the most powerful shinobi in the entire world. You just have to remember that you will only ever get as strong as you want if you have something precious to you that you are getting stronger to protect. What do you mean something precious to protect, Gigi? Naruto, every truly great ninja has something, or someone that is precious to them to protect. It is for their precious people that they get stronger. Just look at the Yondaime. He gave his life to protect this village, because this village was precious to him. If you want to become truly strong, you need to have something or someone to protect. Naruto was silent for a few minutes, trying to think of people that were precious to him. Well, I know I'd want to protect the people from Ichiraku, Tsuki and Ayame. Then there's Iruka-sensei. He's already gotten hurt cause I wasn't strong enough, and even if Gigi is really strong, I don't want him getting hurt. Maybe one day I can be like the Yondaime and fight for everyone in the village. That sounds something I'd like doing, standing up for everyone, even the people who have treated me bad. What better way is there to show them that I'm not a monster? With this, Naruto's resolve to become stronger was reaffirmed, and he turned back to his surrogate grandfather. Gigi, one day I'm going to be like the Yondaime. One day I'll be the one to protect this village, then everyone will have to acknowledge me. Naruto had a bright smile plastered on his face again, not the smile he wore to mask his pain, but a true smile, showing the passion and conviction he had in his words. The Hokage was beaming at the boy. I know you will, Naruto. Now let's get to the library, and then you can get started on your work. The two made the rest of the trip to the library in silence, and once they arrived, the Hokage took a moment to show Naruto around, and asked him to come by the office at the end of the day to pick up the weights he had promised to buy the boy. Naruto was a bit disappointed that the old man would be leaving him at the library, but before he left he found Naruto a book on chakra control, and suggested he set a dozen clones to reading through what they'd discussed earlier, and he could go and work on chakra control himself. Naruto had finally finished browsing through the library and decided it was time that he get out of there and start working on his chakra control. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, after the smoke caused by the technique died down, and he was yelled at by the librarian for yelling in the library, which Naruto found kind of silly, he turned back to face the 30 clones he had just created. Okay men, you're going to break up into 3 groups. 15 of you are going to read in the shinobi history section, 14 are going to be reading up on the laws, and you, he said pointing at one clone in the center of the bunch, are going to be reading up on the shinobi records. You all know what is at stake if you don't take this seriously, and we'll end up suffering from a case of ramen deficit disorder, so get to work, and try not to bug the librarian, so no yelling. You got it, boss. All the clones chanted back in restrained voices. After leaving his clones back in the library, Naruto decided to head to Training Ground 41. He'd come across it back in his early academy days, and had been looking for a private place to practice. It was essentially a small clearing in one of the forests inside the village walls. There were a few training posts in the center, and there was a relatively small body of water just outside the clearing. Sadly, Wen had stumbled into a few shinobi training, and they had told him that the training area could only be used by shinobi, but now he was able to use it, and no one could say anything against it. Naruto arrived in the clearing and found it empty. He decided he'd do a quick stretch, and a warm-up run, and then get started, so he summoned a clone to start reading up the chakra control exercises. After doing his stretches and 2 laps around the clearing, he walked back towards the clone and dispelled it. After feeling the rush of info, he quickly became frustrated that the clone hadn't even gotten beyond the book's introduction, so he sat down himself and spent the next 20 minutes reading through the first chapter, and though he was disheartened at learning the first exercise was the leaf balancing exercise from the academy, he decided if he was going to do the work from the book, he would do it properly. He quickly created 200 clones and instructed them to grab leaves and work on keeping them stuck to their foreheads, and once they were done that, they were to work on spinning them. After instructing the clones, he summoned another clone to help him with the workouts he was going to be doing. Deciding that he might go easy if he just did what he felt was okay, he instructed the clone to come up with the most brutal workout that he would be able to do, and after a few minutes, the clone instructor directed him to do 5 sets of 200 push-ups, 200 sit-ups, 100 chin-ups, 100 squats, and 100 lunges, followed by 100 punches each hand, and 100 kicks each foot. Each set would be followed by 5 laps around the training area. After hearing this, Naruto cursed his clone, and dispelled him with a punch to the face, which he quickly regretted getting the memory of how the punch felt back. OWW, damn, maybe don't attack my own clones, it only ends up hurting me. Well anyways, I guess I should get started if I'm going to be able to drop by the Hokage tower before it gets too late, after all I'm still going to need dinner. At this, Naruto began his training. It was around the start of the 3rd set that he was once again cursing his clone, and realized that he didn't have any food at his house besides ramen, and started panicking about what he was going to do until he came up with the idea of getting a clone to go buy groceries for him after using the Henge no Jutsu. After sending off the now disguised Naruto clone with instructions to buy healthy stuff, he grudgingly got back to work. Naruto woke up with a start. Where am I? Naruto was about to panic when he realized that he was very familiar with the room he had been lying in. He was once again in his surrogate grandfather's office. Now that that question was answered, he became aware that he had a rather painful headache. He got up off the couch and made his way towards the window. He quickly regretted this when his legs buckled underneath him at his first step. Damn it, I guess the workout my clone made me do wasn't such a good idea after all. Hey wait, speaking of my clones, I need to figure out how much my clones at the library read. At this, Naruto began trying to figure out what he had learned. He tried thinking about the history of the village, and dozens of memories came to him, realizing that he had learned a lot about the founding of the village, as well as the founding clans. He congratulated himself. Though he did file in his mind that he was going to have to study more into the individual clans, he always knew that Sasuke was a Tem, but he hadn't thought almost all of the Uchiha clan had been a group of jerks. Struggling to his feet, he slowly made his way to the window in the office, and pulled open the blinds. Looking out on the streets of the village, he saw that it was just after dawn, so he decided to make his way back to the couch. Sitting down, he was working on remembering how he got back to the Hokage's office. He remembered being halfway through the 5th set of his workout the night before. Flashback. Naruto was lying on the ground panting. In fact, panting was what he had been doing for the past 2 hours. His body was screaming in protest at any of his attempts to move, but he was determined to finish his workout. It was getting dark now, and he was getting worried if he didn't finish up soon the Hokage would leave the office for the night, and he didn't want to make his surrogate grandfather wait for him, so with a loud groan of protest he pushed himself up off the ground, and made his way to finish the workout. He didn't know how he did it, but he finished, and even managed to push through the run. He left the clearing heading towards the Hokage tower, completely forgetting about the clones that were lying around the forest practicing the leaf balancing exercise, and dragged himself to the Hokage tower. It was well after sunset by the time he was climbing up the stairs, and he was in sight of Chizoru's desk, when he remembered his clones at the library, and made the hand sign to dispel them. He thought he heard Chizoru say something when his world went black. Flashback end. As Naruto sat on the couch, he thought back to why the Hokage had told him that the Kage Bunshin was dangerous. Baka, I didn't think about how I get all the exhaustion they get as well. Oh man, I totally didn't even bother thinking about the hundreds of clones that I left back at the training ground when I dispelled them. No wonder I was out. I must have used up like all my chakra. Weird, I've never done that before. Still, I wonder how long I've been out for. Naruto decided that because his head was still bothering him, he'd lie back down and wait for the Hokage or Chizuru to come by so they could tell him how long he'd been out. He remembered Iruka-sensei telling him about how chakra exhaustion could leave you unconscious for more than a week if it was bad enough, and he figured he had a bad case of it. Wait a minute, since when do I remember all of Iruka-sensei's boring lectures? I guess I must have read something about it in the books I was reading. Actually, I think I'm going to need to rethink my way of getting my clones to read for me. Judging from how much my head is hurting, I don't think it's a good idea to try and absorb all the things they read at the same time. I guess for now I'll just get them to dispel every time they finish a book. I think that'd work. At this, Naruto allowed himself to drift back off into a dreamless sleep. About 3 hours later, the Hokage was making his way towards his office. He hated leaving Naruto there overnight, but at that time he decided that he'd just let Naruto sleep off his exhaustion in the office. He figured with how quickly Naruto healed, even a case of chakra exhaustion wouldn't keep him down for more than a day. Speaking of days, Hiruzen was looking forward to this one. For the first time in years, he was going to go to his private training ground and start working on honing his skills and trying to get them back to what they once were. He decided he'd spend some time in the office in the early morning in case Naruto woke up early, and then around noon head out himself. He had picked up the chakra weights himself yesterday, but he hadn't given them to the boy because he had been brought into his office by his worried secretary. The Hokage was heading up the staircase thinking about all the paperwork he had gotten through the day before. He couldn't help but congratulate himself, reflecting on how he had finally conquered his nemesis. Unfortunately, he had noticed some severe problems with a lot of the papers brought to him by the civilian council. He was aware that since he had retaken the mantle of Hokage after the Yondaime died sealing the Kyuubi, he had allowed the civilian council to gain more power than they used to have. But upon getting the memories back from all the paperwork, he was shocked to see how bold they had become in the demands they made. He resolved that he was going to remind them that Konohagakure no Sato was a shinobi village, and as such it was essentially a military dictatorship. He was upset that he had allowed himself to become so lax that they could grasp so much power. He told himself that he was going to have to look into the financial matters of the village much more carefully to see just how far they had dared go. They took advantage of my old age, but no more. I will remind them why I was called Kami no Shinobi. They aren't going to get away with this anymore. In fact, I think I'm going to leave behind a dozen clones today, just to ensure that I can read everything they try and demand carefully. I've acted lazily for too long. I'll have to gather as much evidence before I make my move against the civilian council. I just hope Danzo doesn't try and get in my way. He greeted Chizuru with a smile, and made his way into his office to see a quietly sleeping Naruto lying on the couch, and a massive pile of paperwork on his desk. The Hokage sighed and took his place behind his desk. He decided he'd sort through the piles before assigning the work to his clones. He knew he would still need to attend all the meetings, but he couldn't help but smirk at the thought of how the civilian council was going to react to him taking a more dominant role in the meetings. He couldn't even begin to imagine how much they had managed to slip past him in the past 12.5 years, but it wasn't going to be happening anymore. No, he would remind the council why he was the Hokage. However, there was one thing on his mind that he decided he should make a priority. The Uzumaki vault. Kushina had thankfully had the foresight to seal all of the Uzumaki scrolls she had in a storage scroll locked with a blood seal that would only open for Naruto, but the Uzumaki vault was in one of the older banks of the village, and it held all the family's wealth he had forgotten about in the early years of Naruto's life, while he was fending off Danzo's attempts to get a hold of Naruto to make his a weapon. He couldn't believe he had forgotten about them, but he had to make sure that Naruto's inheritance, at least from his mother, was still safe. After spending around half an hour sorting his paperwork, the sleeping blonde on the couch drew his attention. At this point Naruto was waking up, and as he wiped the sleep away from his eyes, he turned to see the top of his surrogate grandfather's head looking at him from behind a giant pile of paperwork. "Hey Gigi, why are you doing all that paperwork? Weren't you going to get your Kage Bunshin to do it for you?" "Ah Naruto, you're up. Yes, I am going to be having my clones do all the paperwork. I just wanted to sort through it while waiting for you to get up." "Oh, that makes sense I guess. So how long was I out?" Naruto was worried he might have been out for a week, and was worried about losing the time from his training. Thankfully he needn't have worried. "You've been asleep since last night. Even I'm slightly shocked by how quickly you've recovered, but then again, I've always believed that your unnaturally high healing rate was caused by the Kyuubi's chakra being present in you." Naruto was slightly shocked to hear that his quick healing was caused by a giant demon, and wasn't slow to mention this. "Are you kidding, old man? Are you saying that the stupid fox is good for something?" "Well Naruto, as sorry as I am to say it, the Kyuubi has done a better job keeping you alive than a good many of the Anbu of this village." At this the Hokage hung his head in shame, thinking back to all of Naruto's hospital visits, because some drunk villagers, or on occasion shinobi, would stumble upon Naruto, and would cause riots trying to get their revenge on the demon. Naruto was thinking back to some of the times he'd ended up in the hospital, and some of the injuries he'd gotten from the mobs that would chase him, and he remembered some of the shinobi that he had read about in the records, and he recalled that some of his wounds had been comparably worse than the wounds that had killed quite a few veteran shinobi. "GG, are you saying that if it wasn't for the Kyuubi I'd be dead?" The Hokage, who was still staring down at his desk, slowly looked back up into the young blonde's eyes. "He's so innocent. If I didn't understand why you used Naruto as the Kyuubi's vessel Minato, I could curse you. Oh, if only you knew by how much the village had betrayed you, Naruto. I'm so sorry I've failed in protecting you." "I don't know Naruto. I would like to say of course not, but only you really know the severity of your injuries, so there is a good chance that without the Kyuubi's chakra healing you, we might not be having this conversation today." Naruto was looking down at the floor, deep in thought. He hated the fox for the pain it had caused him. "If it wasn't for the stupid fox I would probably had a normal life, I might even have had a family, but now that I think about it, I should have been dead a long time ago." Flashback. "Die demon. We'll get you for what you did to our families. We'll kill you this time, brat." The 9-year-old Naruto hadn't managed to keep in his scream as the first kunai embedded itself in his back. He was somewhere in the slums of Konoha, and the mob had managed to herd him into an alley and cut off all the exits. He cursed that he hadn't been fast enough to get away from the mob. Seeing that he had no way to get away, he resigned himself to his fate. He knew they wouldn't kill him. He knew the Hokage would have sent some Anbu to keep him safe. He had asked once why the Anbu didn't just stop the mobs when they formed, but the old man just sighed, and grumbled about the civilian council meddling. Back to Naruto's current situation though, he was holding back tears. He had one kunai stuck in his right shoulder blade, and another man was advancing on him. He knew what was going to happen, and he knew if he tried to protect himself it would only be worse, so he braced himself for the impact as the man drove a knee into the short boy's chest. Naruto heard his ribs crack as he fell forward, only to be kicked onto his back by another member of the mob. Another one lashed out at him with a knife and slashed it across his chest. He could feel the blood running across his chest. Only a little longer. The Anbu will come and get me out of here. The thought still didn't help as the villagers kept on kicking him, and plunging kunai into him. As he felt his consciousness fading, he was running over why the Anbu hadn't gotten him out yet. They usually don't take this long. Are they going to abandon me too? Naruto was overcome with agony and finding it difficult to breathe, as he noticed what looked like the air shimmering at the alley's entrance. Flashback end. That was probably the worst time I'd gotten hurt. I actually still have some scars from that time. I really do have the worst birthdays. Naruto sighed at the memory. Yeah, my life has been pretty horrible. At least after that Gigi always had like a dozen Anbu around on my birthday. Naruto looked back up at his surrogate grandfather, and smiled sadly. Don't worry about it Gigi, at least the fuzzball is good for something. At this Sarutobi looked back up at the boy. He didn't understand how a child that had been through all that the boy had could still be such an optimistic child. He knew that if the boy's parents had been alive to see all that had happened to their son the village would have been in trouble. He could only be thankful that Naruto was truly a kind-hearted child. He once again swore to do a better job helping the boy. Sarutobi slowly got up from his desk and walked around towards where Naruto was sitting on the couch. He slowly sat down beside the boy, and waited a moment before turning towards the boy and speaking. Naruto, this village has committed so many wrongs against you. I promise I'll do whatever I can to help you become the shinobi you want to become. However, seeing as you're up now, I do have the chakra weights that I promised to get you. At this Naruto perked back up. He had been feeling rather down since thinking about the mobs that were always after him on his birthdays, but hearing about the chakra weights he couldn't help but get excited. Awesome, thanks GG, so how do they work? The Hokage watched as Naruto had bounced off the couch, as if they hadn't just been speaking about what was quite possibly the most unpleasant topic two people could ever discuss. The old man sighed slightly at the blonde's antics. He knew it was part of the blonde's way of coping. He wanted to weep thinking back of everything that had caused Naruto to adopt his carefree and happy mask. Naruto, if you open the top drawer of my desk, on the right side, there is a wooden case, bring it over here. Naruto, following the instruction, bolted to the drawer and finding the box in question carried it over to his surrogate grandfather. The wooden box was solid, and had the same spiral that was on the back of his jumpsuit engraved into it. He always had liked the symbol, but he handed the box over to the Hokage. The Hokage, accepting the case from the blonde, took a minute to look at the symbol, and sigh slightly, knowing how few people there were now who knew why the symbol was so important. He opened the case to reveal what looked like a set of 4 metal bands. Naruto, this is a set of chakra weights. They may not look like much, but they are a very useful tool for training. Unlike normal weights that are large and bulky, these will not get in your way. Naruto looked at the 4 metal bands, and had some trouble believing how much they would help him get stronger, but he figured that the Hokage wouldn't make stuff up about training. How do they work then GG? Well, to make them work, you channel chakra into the seals on the inside of the band. At this the Hokage handed Naruto one of the bands. As Naruto looked it over, that the band also had one of the spirals engraved on it. He then looked on the inside, and saw some weird design that looked like it had a kanji or two at the center of the design. What's that GG? The Hokage took another of the bands out of the case, and turned it around to show the blonde. Naruto, these markings on the inside are seals. They are somewhat like the seals that some shinobi use on scrolls to carry some of their possessions. There are actually 2 separate seals on these bands, and they work by channeling chakra into them. One of the seals is to open and close the bands, and the other is the weight seal. Until you have improved your chakra control, I only want you using the seal that opens and closes the bands, because the weight seals only absorb chakra, so once you pump chakra into them, it can't be reduced. So until you have your chakra control mastered, you can come to me to get me to increase the weight of each band. Naruto was somewhat disappointed that he wouldn't be able to do it all himself, but if the other day had taught him anything it was how poor his chakra control was. It took hundreds of his clone an entire afternoon to get the leaf balancing exercise down. Okay GG. Hey wait, you said that some shinobi use seals for carrying stuff and things. Could I learn how to do that sort of thing? Naruto was really hoping that his surrogate grandfather would approve of him trying to learn something new. The Hokage had to work to keep his smile off his face at this request. The Uzumaki clan was naturally gifted at Fuinjutsu, and Minato had been a seal master himself, so he had high hopes for Naruto. A few days ago he would have doubted that Naruto would be able to learn Fuinjutsu because of how much theory there was to it, but if Naruto could spend a day in a library reading things that he had gone out of his way to ignore, he figured the young blonde would put some effort into studying something like Fuinjutsu. Naruto, what you're asking about is a very complicated thing to learn. It is an art known as Fuinjutsu, and it is very hard to learn. The Hokage couldn't help but feel slightly upset that he had decided to tease Naruto. However, I suppose if you can spend hours studying history that I could find you some introductory Fuinjutsu scrolls. Naruto bounded towards the Hokage, tackling him in a hug, excitedly repeating his thanks. The Hokage smiled at this, and slowly brought Naruto out of his ecstatic state, so that they could continue their discussion about the chakra weights. Naruto, I'll find you some scrolls on Fuinjutsu theory by the end of the week, so you should continue doing the training you've started. Now let's get these weights on, okay? Naruto smiled at this, and looked at his surrogate grandfather. The Hokage smiled a bit, and asked Naruto to hold out his hands. Naruto complied instantly, and smiled as the Hokage unlocked the bands, and put the first two around either of his wrists, and then showed Naruto how to use the seals for opening and closing the band, and had the blonde demonstrate that he could do it a few times before he told him to put them on around his ankles. Naruto decided that he liked how they looked. Only the ones on his wrist had the spiral engraved in them, but they were all made of near black slightly shiny steel, just like the kunai he used. Overall he decided that they were pretty badass, and they were going to help him become more badass. Naruto listened as the Hokage explained that he should only ask himself, or other adult shinobi for help with increasing the amount of weight in the seals, and Naruto willing agreed, looking forward to training. The Hokage channeled some chakra into each seal, and told Naruto that each of the chakra weights was around 15 pounds now, and that he shouldn't ask to have them increased till he didn't notice any resistance to moving around with the weights on. After chatting for a little while longer, Naruto decided he should make his way back to his apartment, and get some more rest. It took him quite a bit longer than usual to get back to his house, but finally Naruto made it up the 6th flight of stairs to his apartment. Opening the door and stepping in, he promptly tripped and fell over the piles of old clothes, empty instant ramen cups, and general mess that he had accumulated over the years. Naruto decided that the first thing he'd do is get some food, but seeing as he didn't really feel like moving at the moment, he quickly summoned around half a dozen clones. He ordered 2 to carry him to his room, 1 to cook something, 2 to clean up his apartment, which he had never bothered doing before, but decided if he was going to be a serious ninja he should take the other aspects of his life seriously, and that way he wouldn't be tripping on all the junk lying around. The last clone he decided to send to the library. He told the clone that when it got there it should summon the same amount of clones as the other day, and get to reading. A few hours later Naruto woke up again staring at his ceiling. He made to get up, being mindful of the weights. He decided that he'd rested enough, because the sooner he got to training, the sooner he'd get used to the new weight he was using. After making his way to the kitchen he was shocked by what he saw. There was a large amount of food prepared on the table, and the room looked nothing like it had just a few short hours ago. He sat down in his chair, and greeted the 3 clones who were cleaning up the apartment, and was very thankful he had decided to clean his house up. He ate the meal prepared by the clone, thanking Kami that the clone he had sent to get food yesterday had the sense to get a cookbook. He was still bugged by not getting to eat ramen all the time, but he figured learning how to cook for himself wasn't a bad thing either. After finishing his meal and telling his clones to keep up with the cleaning he set off to train. He arrived at the training ground he had used the last day, finding that it was thankfully vacant once again. he once again summoned a few hundred clones, telling them to continue working on the leaf balancing exercise. He wanted them to be able to balance them by their stems while spinning them with their chakra by the end of the week, so he was sure he mastered the exercise before moving on to the next one, and he once again summoned a clone to come up with a workout for the day. The next few days were brutal for the young blonde. He became slowly convinced he was suffering from ramen deprivation, as well as physical exhaustion from his workouts and mental exhaustion because of the information he would learn from the clones. He had come across some interesting books in his studies, but he still felt sorry for the clones he would send to the library. He was also a little upset with how slow his clones were reading. He knew that they had to read everything thoroughly or he wouldn't get all his ramen, but by this point he wasn't sure if 23 bowls of ramen would last him till the next weekend. Sadly, he was out of time for this week, and was making his way towards the Hokage Tower. Speaking of the Hokage, Naruto had realized just how bad of an idea it had been to call the Hokage old man. When he had been reading some of the older laws, he found out that being so disrespectful towards the village leader was a punishable offense, and he was increasingly glad that he was as close with the Hokage as he was. He had visited Iruka Sensei the following evening, and gotten quizzed on the books he had read, and was slightly shocked that his old sensei was surprised he had read 23 books over the course of the week. He knew he had been a bad student, but he was still a little offended that Iruka hadn't immediately believed that he had read all the books he said. Naruto was by now outside the door of his surrogate grandfather's office, and was looking forward to two things, the first of which was he'd be getting some scrolls on Fuinjutsu, and the second was obviously the ramen. The Hokage, unlike Naruto, hadn't had a good week. It had been one issue after the other. He had started training again, and was sorely disappointed in how far his skill had fallen. And if all the work he was putting his body through to work himself back up wasn't enough, he had discovered that the civilian council had managed to steal all the funds from the Uzumaki vaults. 4 members of the civilian council were still unconscious in the hospital due to the pressure of the ki he had directed at them and the finance minister would probably never recover. He had very nearly executed the entire civilian council for saying that the funds were appropriated because of the damage the Kyuubi had caused in its attack. He actually had ordered the banking minister to meet with Ibiki for further questioning, but he was never more ashamed of the village as a whole than he had been at that moment. The Uzumaki clan had helped fund the Senju clan when they were founding the village, because the Uzumaki clan and the Senju clan were distantly related. The Uzumaki clan had already settled in Uzu no Kuni before Konoha had been founded, and their lands were rich with precious metals and gems. The Hokage side, he had ordered the money returned, but he didn't know how long the civilian council would drag out returning it, but he had to make sure that the money was back at the very least by Naruto's 16th birthday, because at that point, whether he was a Chunin or not, he was granted his inheritance. He was drawn out of his dark mutterings by a knock at his door, and knowing that he had an appointment with Naruto today, invited the young blonde in. The two spoke for a while, well, more accurately Naruto talked, and the Hokage listened. He was ecstatic to hear of Naruto's successes. He was also shocked when the boy asked to have his weights increased, but he complied, increasing each of the weights to 20 pounds. The two soon left the office heading to Naruto's favorite place to eat, Ichiraku Ramen. Their arrival caused an uproar with the ramen chef and his daughter, who had been worried all week when Naruto hadn't shown himself once. The last time they had seen him was the day of his academy exam, and they still hadn't known if he had passed or not. Tuki and Ayame were both very happy when they saw their favorite blonde stroll into their stand. After chatting for a bit, and the expected heart attack scare on Tuki's part upon hearing that his favorite customer wasn't going to be eating his ramen every day, the group discussed what Naruto had been up to the past week. Tuki and Ayame were shocked to hear how much the young blonde was working himself, and were completely shocked upon hearing what Mizuki had tried to do to Naruto. Tuki smiled upon hearing that the Hokage would be buying Naruto ramen weekly though, and he truly believed that using ramen as motivation was a brilliant way to motivate the boy to work on his studies. It also didn't hurt that it meant he would be getting the Hokage himself as a recurring patron, and in Konoha, that meant good things for your business. When Naruto finally placed his order, Tsuki couldn't help but hold back a slightly shocked expression. He was accustomed to Naruto being able to down a dozen bowls or ramen if he had needed to go without it for a day or two, but hearing the young boy order 23 assorted bowls, he couldn't believe that the young blonde would be able to finish them. Overall, the visit took a little over an hour. To most, the sight of the young blonde practically inhaling bowl after bowl of ramen was slightly revolting, but a select few watched with an odd fascination, curious as to where all the ramen went. It took till the 20th bowl for Naruto to slow down. He remembered that this would be the only time he would eat ramen for the next 7 days, and decided he would savor the last 3 bowls. When the blonde finally finished off the last bowl, placing it on the precariously high pile, Tsuki smirked at his other customers' astonishment. The only one who could have possibly eaten more ramen was a near-starved Akamichi, and even then he figured they would be hard-pressed. The Hokage departed a short while after Naruto finished eating. He would have loved to spend more time with his surrogate grandson, but he himself had work to do, and even with his clones handling all his old paperwork, he still had meetings to attend, and training to do, so after warning Naruto not to overdo it with his training, he made his way out. Naruto left shortly after that, saying that he'd see Tsuki and Ayame next week, nearly bursting into tears of the thought of having to go so long without ramen, and seeing the young boy's distress, Tsuki offered Naruto a bowl to take with him, to which shockingly the blonde refused. He said even though he didn't like it, he had promised the old man that he would only eat ramen once a week, and only when the Hokage bought it. Naruto made his way back to his apartment, deciding he'd take today easy, so that he'd be able to get used to the added weight he had on. On his trip back home, he was thinking back over some of the things he had learned in the past week. Flashback. Naruto had just mastered the leaf exercise, and could now balance the leaf on his forehead only using its stem, and he had finally gotten down the more refined chakra control to rotate it. He had been making his way to drop off his rent, and had decided he'd give the rent to the man who owned the apartment in person. So he was shocked when he waited outside the door for 10 minutes after knocking before he finally realized that the hinges on the door looked like they were rusted shut. Naruto let his curiosity get the best of him, and decided to sneak in through one of the windows, and found that the place was covered in dust. There had been some old furniture there, left as if forgotten, but upon exploring the apartment, he was shocked to see that behind the door was a small pile of the envelopes he delivered every month as his rent. He noticed that there were 3 years' worth of rent in the pile, and he tried to remember the last time he had seen anybody in the complex. Sadly, he couldn't remember seeing anyone in the building since he was 9, so he cursed his poor observations, took the pile of money he had slowly accumulated in the empty apartment, and created a few clones to search the rest of the complex. He found all the apartments in a similar condition to the first one he searched, aside for the apartment on the 9th floor, being the top floor of the apartment. He assumed it had once been used by some rich people, because the apartment on the top floor was a suite that took up the entire 9th level. He was shocked that anybody needed that much room, but he figured rich people probably had that much space just to show off. Flashback end. Naruto arrived back at his apartment. He had debated taking residence in the huge apartment on the top floor, but he figured it was just more empty space. However, he didn't feel bad about moving to one of the apartments in the building that had a slightly bigger kitchen and living room. He had found that apparently only the hot water in his apartment didn't work, so he moved to one of the other apartments on his floor. He had also taken the liberty of borrowing some of the furniture from the apartment on the top floor. He figured if it was just going to sit there, someone should make use of it. He made his way to the couch in his living room and relaxed. He drifted back off into sleep, looking forward to training, and faded into dreams of him swimming through lakes filled with ramen. Naruto woke up a few hours later, and created a clone to quickly cook something. He decided to do push-ups while waiting for his meal to be prepared, and was at around 500 by the time the clone dispelled, letting him know that the food was done. He quickly ate, and decided that he would visit Iruka-sensei in the hospital. He's probably bored out of his mind. It's good he's able to leave in a couple days. I'll ask him to get ramen with me and Gigi next week. It had been a month since the incident with the Forbidden Scroll, and Naruto was shocked at how much he had changed. He was faster, smarter, stronger, and even slightly more mature. He looked over the past month with a sense of pride. He had gotten so much stronger than he was before, and he had essentially done it on his own. He had asked for some pointers from his surrogate grandfather, or Iruka-sensei, if he needed help with some of his training, but he'd been doing the work himself. Naruto was currently lying on top of the Hokage monument staring up at the night sky. He never knew why he was drawn to sitting on the Yondaimi's head, but the man was his idol after all, even if he had sealed the stupid fox inside him. It had been a long day of training for our young blonde, and he was just taking some time to rest. He lifted his arms above his head in a stretch, and smiled at the resistance he felt. He had gone against the Hokage's advice and increased each of his weights by 10 pounds. Yesterday instead of the usual 5, and was proud he wasn't finding it too difficult to get used to the new weight. He had spent the last month reading through all the shinobi history of the village, and he was pleased to say that the Hokage had agreed that anything more he read about their village's history was redundant by this point, seeing as he would only be going over it from different perspectives, so he had instructed Naruto to learn about the history of the other shinobi villages. He had decided he'd read about the villages that were allied with Konoha first, and decided that he'd start reading up on the founding of Sunakage tomorrow. He had read about a lot of smaller villages in passing, and was looking forward to reading about them too. He had also read in a few of the histories about a village called Uzumaki, the village hidden in the whirling tides. Apparently the village had been an ally of Konoha, but had been destroyed in the Second Shinobi War, and was now nothing more than ruins. He figured that the best way to go about his reading to keep himself from getting everything he learned confused would be to study the different villages one at a time. So he would only study the destroyed villages, after he had built up a good knowledge on the ones that were still around, and could pose a threat to his home today. Naruto was also looking forward to when he'd be able to go out on missions and see the other villages. He had decided he wanted to see the ruins of Uzumaki, and had made a mental note to ask his Gigi if when he was a bit older if he would be allowed to go and visit the place. The blonde pushed himself up off the Yondaimi's head, and slowly stood up. He nearly fell forwards off the monument, but quickly stabilized himself by pushing Chakra to his feet till he didn't fall. Phew, that wouldn't have been good. Thank Kami I listened to Gigi and worked on my chakra control. The young blonde had slowly been making his way through chakra control exercises and had finally gotten the tree walking exercise down the other day. He was still having trouble deciding what the next exercise he was going to do would be. There were two that stood out to him as immediately useful. He figured he'd be able to get them both down before he had his team assignment, but was trying to decide which would be more immediately useful, in case he couldn't get them both down. Water walking makes sense as the next thing to learn, but the chakra circulation exercise would be really useful for when it's cold, so I don't have to run around in a big jacket all the time. Well, if Gigi is gonna buy me some new shinobi gear, I know I'm going to have to tone down the orange. As much as orange is a kick-ass color, it really isn't the smartest thing for a shinobi to wear. Naruto was laughing at himself while he was making his way back towards his apartment. He was looking around when he felt someone watching him, and quickly turned to look towards one of the rooftops, and saw an Anbu shift out of sight. Just you wait, Anbu-san. At this the young blonde had a slightly sinister grin etched across his face. He had initially intended his painting the Hokage monument to be his last big prank that would be forever remembered, but recently he had gotten an idea to work on something. He came up with his idea, and knew that it would be his crowning achievement in the pranking world. If he succeeded pulling it off, he might make enemies of some of the less good-natured Anbu, but he figured pulling off this prank would also show him just how far he had gotten in his stealth training. By this time, the blonde had made it back to his apartment building and walked up to his new apartment. He had told the Hokage about the building being abandoned, and the Hokage just said he didn't want Naruto living there in an empty building. After much begging and pleading, Naruto managed to convince his surrogate grandfather to allow him to stay, and after even more begging and pleading, the old man grudgingly gave him permission to use the building, as he saw fit. Naruto reached his apartment door and walked in. The apartment he had moved into after discovering the building was empty was much nicer space, and Naruto had also managed to convince Iruka to buy him what he needed to start working on Fuinjutsu. After getting the Fuinjutsu scrolls from the Hokage, Naruto had delved into it, and was shocked to find that he had trouble turning away from the scrolls. It took Naruto 2 days to get through the set of scrolls his surrogate grandfather had given him, and he spent the rest of the week rereading them to ensure he had everything memorized. The scrolls hadn't had any actual seals in them, they were in all about the theory behind Fuinjutsu. The second week he got some scrolls on all the different types of seals, and finally the other day, he had gotten some instructing scrolls on how to create seals. After getting all the theory down, Naruto had been anxious to try them out, and decided to make a simple storage seal. It took him 8 ruined scrolls, but he finally managed to get the formula right for creating a storage seal. He was currently using it to carry around his book on chakra control, a bingo book that he got after spending more time in the library, as well as a few bentos that he or one of his clones would prepare in the mornings. He had also been working on a set of barrier seals, and figured he nearly had the formula down behind them. It was a 6-point barrier. He had decided on this, because he had learned that anything under a 6-point barrier could destabilize if one of the seals was destroyed, but this way, if one of the seals failed, the barrier would continue to operate until there were only 3 left. He wanted to have an 8-point seal, but he knew that was far more advanced, and so he stuck with a 6-point seal. As Naruto made his way to his bedroom, which now, thanks to the generously donated furniture from the giant apartment on the top floor, had a rather large and exceptionally soft bed up against the window. He dropped into his bed and started drifting off, thinking of all the shinobi he had read about in the shinobi records. He had been slightly upset when he found out that the majority of the shinobi listed in the archive were all either retired or deceased shinobi. He understood now that it was because it was sensitive data, and as such the village couldn't have info on their current shinobi out to the public, but he had been happy to find that there was stuff about the well-known shinobi of the village. He had been reading up on his personal hero, the Yondaime Hokage, and found out that his teacher was none other than one of the legendary Sannin. He only knew a lot about them because he had found an old bingo book in the library, and found it really interesting, so he went out to a shinobi supply store under the Henge no Jutsu, and got himself a copy. Naruto realized that if he was going to be going out on missions, he was at one point or another going to face shinobi from other villages. He decided that as awesome as he was, or was going to be, that he should know about the really dangerous shinobi across the elemental nations. The next 6 weeks passed like the month before. Naruto trained himself into the ground with fervor every single day, and would study Fuinjutsu in the evenings till it hurt his head. The only thing not directly related to his training that he had done in the 6 weeks, were at the 1-month mark from team assignment, he had finally pulled what he dubbed his masterpiece as the village prankster. Flashback. Naruto was sneaking through the village, and making his way towards Anbu headquarters. It was supposed to be a secret location, but after following a small group of Anbu around for a few days, he figured out its location. As Naruto slipped out of the side alley he was standing in wearing his trademark bright orange jumpsuit, he dashed across the street keeping low, and to the shadows to avoid detection. He decided that this mission would be his jumpsuit's last mission, no matter how much he loved the color. A bright orange jumpsuit was probably the least non-discreet outfit he could even wear. This was exactly why he was wearing it on this mission. If he could sneak into Anbu headquarters undetected, in a kill me orange jumpsuit no less, and pull off his prank, well then, that had to say something about his infiltration and stealth skill. Okay, now if I remember, I've gotta head all the way down this alley, then there is a side passage that'll take me close to the Anbu headquarters. Naruto kept to the shadows against the walls in the alley. He had debated using the rooftops, but he knew that would get someone's attention. He was about to turn a corner when he heard someone coming around the corner. He quickly jumped up and stuck himself to the bottom of a balcony and stayed there as he watched the people walk underneath him. The two were wearing standard Konoha vests, and were talking about some mission. Naruto decided not to pay much attention to the details they were talking about, but he made a note of what the shinobi looked like. From his vantage point he could tell that one of the men had silver hair, and from what he could tell seemed to be wearing a mask covering the lower half of his face. Damn, that looks cool, I gotta remember to get some of those when I go shopping with Gigi, besides it's a good way to help keep who I am a secret on missions. The other man looked like an older Shikamaru to Naruto, so he figured the second man was his infamously lazy classmate's father. He stayed in his hiding place until the two men passed him. He waited a few minutes, to ensure that they were gone before he dropped back down to the ground. Moving quickly, he rounded the corner, and saw his target. The Anbu headquarters weren't anything like one would expect. The building seemed to have been designed to be the most plain and unimportant looking building imaginable. It appeared to be a small 4-story apartment complex, but Naruto knew that the Anbu headquarters also had a substantial underground section, so he moved towards the building. Naruto had already visited the building once, so he knew how he was going to get inside. He quickly made his way around to the back of the building, and started making his way up the drain pipe. He could have just walked up to his entryway, but he didn't want to risk alerting anyone by using chakra. Once he made his way to the third-floor window, and slid inside. Making a quick check around, he found that the halls were empty. He knew his target was in the first floor underground. He silently made his way towards the staircase, and performed his Henge no Jutsu, to appear as the silver-haired man he saw earlier, and made his way down the staircase. He was surprised that he hadn't met any security, but decided not to question his luck. Upon making his way to the first subterranean level, he dispelled his henge, and realized why he hadn't run into anyone. He heard some loud cheering, and singing. Letting his curiosity get the better of him, he snuck towards the door that the noise was coming from, and saw inside what looked like a lounge, dozens of shinobi drinking sake and handing gifts to another one of the shinobi. Naruto couldn't believe his luck that the Anbu would let their guard down for someone's birthday. He certainly wasn't going to let this get in the way of his prank. He quickly made his way down the hallway to the equipment room. He pulled out a storage scroll that he had in his pocket, and made quick work, not wanting to waste any more time that was necessary. Hey, I can't wait to see them tomorrow morning. I so gotta hear it when they try to explain this to Gigi. With that last thought, the young blonde retraced his steps, and made his way out of the building. I can't believe that I got away with that. I mean, wow, those are our elite shinobi, they won't know what hit them. Unable to hold back his laughter, the blonde let out a small chuckle as he launched himself out of the third-floor window. He didn't even mind if someone noticed the chakra he used. He had to get back to his apartment before he woke up the village with his laughter. Little did Naruto know that one person saw his escape, the same silver-haired shinobi from earlier that evening. The man didn't know what the blonde had done, but he had a feeling he should stop by the Hokage's office in the morning. The Sandaime Hokage woke up the following morning feeling anxious. He wasn't sure what caused it, but he knew that today was going to be a long day. Naruto, I hope you don't have anything to do with what's wrong. Oh, how wrong he was. The next day, feeling like he should find out the issue as soon as possible, he left for his office early. When he arrived, he was shocked to find several Anbu stationed outside his office doorway, waiting for him to arrive. It wasn't odd for the Anbu to be in his office. After all, he almost always had several hidden inside his office in case of intruders, but since he had taken to training more and having his clones do the paperwork, he had removed those Anbu. He didn't want his new method of dealing with paperwork to be leaked after all. Sarutobi also noticed something else odd about the Anbu. They were all wearing large hooded cloaks over their uniforms that went all the way to the floor, completely obscuring their uniforms. Putting off that for the moment, he quickly walked into his office, and sat behind his desk. Sighing and rubbing the bridge of his nose, he turned to the Anbu who was currently in charge. Neko, report, why are you all concealing your uniforms? There was a noticeably awkward pause while the four Anbu looked at each other. Finally, the one identified as Neko spoke. Hokage-sama, we have reason to believe Anbu headquarters was infiltrated, either late last evening, or early this morning. What? How could this happen? What was the damage? The Hokage was absolutely shocked. Who could have broken into his elite shinobi's headquarters? That was a huge problem. If someone could get in once, then they could do it again, and there was no telling how much damage they might have done to the village. Well, that's the thing, Hokage-sama. You see, nothing was damaged, per se, and nothing seems to be missing either. At this, Neko lowered her masked head. To say the Hokage was relieved was an understatement, but that led to other concerns, such as why the Anbu all looked so embarrassed. If nothing was missing or damaged, then why were they all here, and what was with their cloaks? I see, Neko. Well, that is good at least. I must ask then, why did you all feel the need to come by? And if nothing is out of place, how do you know that your headquarters were even infiltrated? Well, Hokage-sama, we sensed a chakra signature heading away from headquarters, and then there was the other thing. I see. Could you identify the chakra signature? Possibly, Hokage-sama, but it could take a while. It was only detected for a brief moment. I see, and how brief of a moment is that? 1 second, Hokage-sama. The Hokage was curious now. Who could possibly have gotten into the Anbu headquarters, and managed to go completely undetected? It was an issue, but he was still rather curious as to the cloaks, so he decided to change his line of questioning. Well then, Neko, you and your men will just have to continue looking into this issue. Now would you kindly explain why you are all concealing your uniforms? At this, all the Anbu tensed, and then what they did surprised the Hokage. After all, it wasn't every day that the village's elite ninja would shuffle around, fiddling with their hands, and look everywhere but at the Hokage. Well, you see, Hokage-sama, there was one thing that was damaged at headquarters. The Hokage could tell that they were stalling and trying to get around his question, so he decided to just circumvent their evasions. Anbu, I order you to remove your cloaks. The Anbu looked towards each other. If it weren't for the fact that their faces were covered, the Sandaime would swear that they all looked horrified at the idea, but after receiving another stern glare from the Hokage, they knew that they couldn't stall any longer. The Hokage watched with interest as the Anbu started undoing the fastenings along the cloak. He was slightly surprised when he saw that they were closed all the way from the neck to where they brushed the ground. He grew more and more curious until the Anbu realized that they had no other method for stalling and they all dropped their cloaks. The Hokage looked at his Anbu dumbly for a moment and didn't say anything, and then burst out laughing at the sight before him. Before him stood 4 of his elite shinobi, all wearing matching Anbu uniforms, in a brilliantly bright, kill me orange. Needless to say, he automatically understood why the Anbu were so embarrassed. After all, there was only one shinobi in all of Konoha that enjoyed that particular color, and he just so happened to be the only person in Konoha who would have the gall to sneak into Anbu headquarters just to dye all their uniforms that color. After taking a moment to calm down, the Hokage turned back to his now obviously humiliated Anbu. Well, I assume that it wasn't just the 4 of you who had their uniforms damaged. No, Hokage-sama, there was not a single uniform left in headquarters that wasn't damaged. At this point, all 5 people standing in the office heard what sounded like a snort of laughter, and saw a book tumble off the shelf and land on the floor. If this wasn't enough of a confusing occurrence, The fact that the book exploded in a puff of smoke to reveal a certain young blonde who was notoriously famous for his pranks, laughing so hard that he was wheezing and pointing at the Anbu, realizing his cover was blown, and taking advantage of the momentary shock on everyone in the room's face, the blonde made a hand sign, and seemingly puffed out of existence. After a moment of shock and profuse embarrassment on the ANBU's part, the Hokage turned and spoke again. Well, Neko, it would seem that our culprit has revealed himself. If you wouldn't mind, would you please have him retrieved and brought to my office? This seemed to get the ANBU's attention. Each of them was mentally smacking themselves on the back of their heads for not figuring out who it was that had done this, but then they quickly came to realize a horrifying fact. Hokage-sama, would it be possible for us to head out in standard issue Chunin and Jonin attire, as opposed to this? Neko asked this hopefully. If it was required, they would even all pay for the temporary uniforms, but anything was better than what they were wearing. Sadly, and to their horror, they would not get off that easily. I think not, Neko. Perhaps you can think of this as an exercise in stealth. After all, if a genin fresh out of the academy managed to infiltrate your headquarters in such an outfit, surely you can all operate for a day or two in orange as well. The Hokage was internally laughing his head off at the way the Anbu all slumped their shoulders at that, and also, pass that along to all other Anbu, that they are not permitted to attempt to camouflage their outfits. The Anbu looked terribly defeated as they walked out of the Hokage's office, and began passing out the Hokage's orders. Needless to say, the Anbu heeded the Hokage's word in regard to treating their outfits as part of a stealth exercise, because only 2 Anbu were spotted by anyone that day. Flashback end. Naruto would always remember that as his greatest prank ever. It would live in the memories of the Anbu for generations to come, and he couldn't help but be proud of how he had managed to pull it off. Another thing he had been proud of was how he had managed to evade the Anbu. They had been trying to catch him for several days. He had actually managed to break his own personal record on Anbu evasion. His old record had been something like 6 hours. This time it took the Anbu nearly 4 days to find him. However, even looking back at the memory of his most well-executed prank could not suppress the sadness and hurt he felt that was caused by his recent discovery. 2 days ago, Naruto had been in the library reading up on the history of other shinobi villages, and he decided he would read up a bit on Uzumaki. He was initially shocked on how little information he could find on it. It was almost as if someone, or several people had made it their mission to rid the library of all the information on Uzumaki that they could. Being who he was, this only further pushed the blonde to find the information, and after hours of searching, and through liberal use of the Henge no Jutsu to gain access to the restricted sections of the shinobi library, he found 2 books, one on the alliance of Konoha and Uzu, and the other being a very old book about the history of Uzumaki. Nothing he had expected could have prepared him for what he found in those books. It took him till the second line of the first of the 2 books to find a name that he didn't expect to find. He found the history of the Uzumaki clan. If it hadn't been for how much he'd been training and learning over the past few months, he would have ran to confront the Hokage about what he was learning right then and there, but as he was, he couldn't do anything but read and weep at the tragic stories. Uzumaki was a relatively small shinobi village, located to the west of the Land of Fire, in the island nation of Uzu no Kuni. Uzumaki was founded by the Uzumaki clan a decade before Konohagakure, and was remarkably wealthy. From what he read, he learned that they had earned their wealth through the mineral-rich islands of Uzu, which had an abundance of precious metals, as well as rather large gemstone deposits. The Uzumaki were renowned for their unmatched skill in fuinjutsu, as well as their remarkable vitality as well as their longevity. It wasn't unheard of for an Uzumaki to live well into their 100s. He was confused as to how he should feel about what had happened to his clan. They had been destroyed, almost entirely during the Second Shinobi War, when the armies of Kurigakure, Iwagakure and Kumogakure as well as some of the smaller villages, all joined forces to attack Uzu. He read about the last stand of his people, and how even though they were hopelessly outnumbered, his clan stood their ground so they could ensure that the civilians were able to escape from the slaughter. Uzumaki had a shinobi force numbering around 2,000 in total, and the combined armies numbered were over 40,000, and still his family and his people stood their ground. They held the island hoping for help from either Konoha or Suna, but after 3 weeks of siege, and their numbers shinobi force taking casualties, the last of the Uzu shinobi gathered together, and managed to use a forbidden seal of their design at the cost of their own lives to seal the souls of all the attacking forces on Uzu. He had spent the last 2 days training himself harder than ever with the knowledge that he could be the last of his clan, and as such he had to make sure that his ancestors would be proud of him. Naruto had always wondered about his past, and about who his parents were, but he had never bothered looking through the shinobi records for information on them. He was an orphan, and for all he knew Uzumaki might have just been a name randomly given to him, but after reading all he had on clan laws, he knew it was a punishable offense to take a clan name if you were either born into the clan or adopted into it. And seeing that he wasn't adopted, it meant at least one of his parents was an Uzumaki. Naruto had made a point of ignoring the shinobi records for the past 2 days in fear of what he might find. He had always wanted to know who his parents were, but now that he knew that he might be able to find who they were, he was worried about what they would think of him. He was worried he might not be able to live up to their legacies. The next morning, Naruto awoke from dreams of his clan's last stand. He looked up at his jacket hanging in his closet, and stared at the spiral he had always worn on his sleeve. He couldn't quite remember when he got it, but he knew it had been on one of his birthdays. He couldn't help but be upset with the village for wearing his clan's symbol, and so easily forget all his clan had stood for. The spiral that was on the back of all Konoha flak jackets was the symbol of the Uzumaki clan. When Konoha had been founded, the head of the Uzumaki clan had allowed the village to wear their symbol as a sign of trust and friendship between their villages. Sighing at the forgotten memory of his clan, Naruto slowly went about his morning routine. I can't keep putting it off anymore, I need to know who they were. As Naruto left his house, he began making his way towards the library. He would have stopped by the Hokage's office earlier, but he couldn't help but feel betrayed that his surrogate grandfather never told him about his clan. He decided that if he couldn't find his parents in the shinobi record, he'd talk to the Hokage, but he decided that he couldn't have just some clone looking for his family. He decided that he needed to find out for himself. He made his way into the library, greeting the receptionist, and barely receiving any hostility from her. He had been coming here for the past 2.5 months after all, so he wasn't an entirely unwelcome sight. He learned that the head librarian didn't care who he was as long as he treated the books he read with respect, and he kept quiet. Making his way up a few staircases, he headed to where the records were kept. He was still apprehensive about what he might find, but he decided he couldn't let his worry get in his way. He quickly scanned through the records, finding the clan section. He hadn't bothered looking through clans, because he didn't know he had belonged to one. Scrolling through, he saw a lot of names he recognized as the names of his classmates, as well as some he wasn't too familiar with. He saw the Aburame, the Akamichi, the Hitaki, the Hyuga, the Inazaka, the Kurama, the Nara, the Sarutobi, the Senju, the Shimura, the Uchiha, and the Yamanaka clan. He was instantly disheartened that his clan wasn't even listed here, but he decided that because they weren't officially a clan of Konoha, maybe they would just be in the main record. Sighing, he moved to a long row of drawers and searched through it. He was once again upset that the record had the shinobi listed based on the day of their death, so he spent a few minutes trying to figure out when his parents could have passed away. He in a matter of moments came to the conclusion that because he was born on the night of the Kyuubi attack, then at least his mother had to be alive all the time before then. He sighed as the move to the 2 drawers set apart labeled for the Kyuubi attack. Naruto spent hours going through the drawers. He couldn't help but feel responsible for every name he read. He felt sad to think that all that was left of all these shinobi who had died defending their village was a 4 inches by 6 inches card that had their information listed on it. He had been going through the records almost the entire day now, and it was getting near sunset when he realized he was coming near the end. Over the past hour or so, he had begun thinking that maybe what the villagers told him about his mother abandoning him had been right. If she wasn't in the records, then she must have abandoned him. As he was flipping through the final 20 cards, he noticed something that looked odd. He flipped back to the card in question, and stared at the name again. He was having a hard time making out what it said, because it looked like someone had spilt something over the card. Getting upset at that, Naruto pulled out a spare scroll that he had with him, and set the card on top of it. He wasn't sure if using his chakra to transfer the writing would work properly with something like this, but that was how you transferred seals from scrolls to other tools. Setting the card gently on the scroll, he placed his hands over top of it, and slowly began channeling his chakra through it. He knew the theory behind moving seals, even though he hadn't actually practiced it much yet, but because it wasn't a seal, he channeled his chakra slowly, in hopes of just picking up the writing that was there before the stain. After several minutes of channeling his chakra, Naruto slowly removed the card and read what it said. Name: Uzumaki, Kushina. AKA the Bloody Habanero, the Red Death. Rank: Jonin. Specialty: Fuinjutsu, Kenjutsu. Note: at time of death, was off duty, due to pregnancy. In the Hokage Tower. Several hours later, across the village, the Hokage was sitting his office. He had been worried about Naruto not having come by his office today, and so he had asked Kakashi to summon the boy. He knew it wasn't the best use of his arguably most skilled Jonin, but he figured it would give Naruto a chance to meet his soon-to-be sensei a little early. It was worrying him now because he had sent Kakashi off over 3 hours ago. Sadly, this was when Kakashi came flying through his office window panting. Kakashi, what is it? Where is Naruto? The silver-haired masked shinobi looked up at the Hokage and could only answer with one word. Gone.